Charges for civil engineering services. CE laws, ethics, and contracts. So, in general, charges for engineering services are usually computed using one of the 6 methods. Number 1 is salary cost times multiplier plus direct non-salary expense or reimbursable. So, pag sinabi natin reimbursable, ito yung mga kailangan bayaran sa construction project. Number 2 is hourly billing rates plus reimbursable. So, this is the charge being paid to engineering services per hour. Number 3 is per diem. This is the charge paid for engineering services per day. Number 4 is cost plus fixed fee or CPFF. Ito yung construction cost plus the fee na binabayad sa isang civil engineer. Number 5 is fixed price. When you say fixed price, it means that a certain construction service or engineering service has its designated of fixed price. And number 6 is percentage of construction cost. Simply percentage. So the combinations of method of payment for different phases of the contract may be used. So if a client is charging for a civil engineering services, he or she can choose from the 6 methods. So the method or combination of methods used depends upon the nature. So yung method, pwede rin daw combination of methods of charging for civil engineering services, but it depends upon the nature. When we say nature, it is the type of engineering service, scope, yung saklaw ng service o yung area of the service, and complexity of services, or simply how demanding or how challenging the service required by the client. So the first 4 methods yung nabanggit kanina, yung salary cost times multiplier plus direct non-salary expense or reimbursable, yung hourly billing rates plus reimbursable, per diem, at yung cost plus fixed fee or CPFF, are based upon the civil engineering cost to perform services. They are particularly applicable to assignments where the scope of service is not self-defined. So it means that the scope of a certain construction project changes, and the professional fees, particularly civil engineering services fees, varies to these changes. So on the other hand, the last 2 methods from the 6 methods, yung the fixed price and the percentage of construction cost methods, are based upon a specific deliverable and do require that the project scope be well defined. So kung yung first 4 methods of charging for a civil engineering service is not self-defined, the service is not self-defined, doon naman sa last 2, na fixed price and percentage of construction cost methods, the project scope is well defined. So on the next slide, we will proceed to the discussion of each method of charges for civil engineering services.
Salary cost times multiplier plus non-salary expense. Compensation on the basis of salary cost times an agreed multiplier is a frequently used method of determining charges for engineering services. With this method, charges for civil engineering services are based mainly on direct salaries. The salary cost times multiplier method may be utilized as either a multiplier times the salary cost, 2 multiplier version, or multiplier times direct salary cost, single multiplier version. The direct salary times multiplier, or as it frequently called the direct labor times multiplier version, is very similar to the salary cost times the multiplier, with the exception that it is applied a single multiplier to unburden direct labor costs, direct salaries without employees' benefits. The single multiplier includes costs associated with employees' benefits, overhead, and a margin for contingency, risks, and profits. Regardless of method utilized as a basis of compensation, a provision in the agreement shall state that payment will be made to the civil engineer during progress of the services based on monthly invoices and within a reasonable time after billing. The following factors are pertinent to the salary cost times multiplier. So, una is the salary cost. Salary cost is defined as the direct salaries plus the employee benefits, chargeable to the project, sick leave, vacation, holidays, incentive pays, unemployment, and other payroll taxes, and the contribution for social security workers, compensation, insurance, retirement, medical, and other group of benefits. So, pangalawa is the multiplier. Multiplier, which is applied to salary cost, is a factor that compensates the civil engineer for overhead plus a reasonable margin for contingency, interest, or investing capital readiness to serve and profits. Average multiplier should be between 2.5 and 3 times the average cost. So, ang multiplier, ito yung parang factor na i-multiply sa average salary cost. Ito yung commission na pero meron siyang direct or constant or fixed. So, number 3, direct non-salary expense. Usually incurred in engineering engagement may include the following: living and traveling expenses, identifiable communication expenses, expenses for service and equipment directly applicable to the project, identifiable drafting supplies, stenographic supplies, and reproduction work, expenses for unusual insurance and specialized health and safety program. So sa direct non-salary expenses, halimbawa yung engineer magkakaroon ng seminar or training sa ibang bansa, ang mga expenses doon ay isagot na ng company. Number 4, civil engineers overhead, which comprises a major portion of compensation generated by multiplier on salary costs, includes the following indirect costs: provision for office expenses, tax and insurance other than those included as salary costs, library and periodical expenses, executive, administrative, accounting, legal, stenographic, and clerical salaries and expenses other than salaries included in salary costs and expenses, business development expenses, provision for lost or productive times, cost of acquiring and maintaining computer development of software and training staff when not billed as direct costs. Accounting records. The civil engineer who performs services under a salary cost times multiplier agreement or the other cost-based agreement must provide the accounting necessary to segregate and record the appropriate and expenditures. Yung civil engineer is required na mag-provide ng accounting records para makita at malaman niya yung tamang paggastos ng budget or ng pera na gagamitin sa isang project or dun sa service niya.
Hourly billing rate, charges for civil engineering services. So, yung hourly rate method of compensation is very similar to the salary cost times multiplier method in that hourly billing rate includes all direct personal expense. So, yung hourly billing rate is very similar to the first method of charging for civil engineering services, which is the salary cost times multiplier method. In this hourly billing rate, it includes all direct personal expenses, just like the first method. It includes all direct personal expense, yung personal expenses of doing your service on a construction project or construction area, overhead or yung ongoing expenses while doing the service or while you are in a construction project, while you are operating a civil engineering service. And profit is going to book from the cost and the expenses. So the direct and salary expenses are a separate item for reimbursement, usually with a service charge. Civil engineering firms may elect to utilize this method of compensation on projects where the scope of service is not well defined, or to simplify accounting and record keeping. So, yung mga not well defined na methods is yung first to fourth methods. Kasama ito yung yung hourly rate method. So, simply, yung hourly rate method is a method of charging civil engineering services per hour. So, yung professional or civil engineer is being compensated per hour. So, the next is per diem, charges for civil engineering services. When we say per diem, it simply says per day. The term day or diem normally refers to an 8-hour day. Direct personal services are frequently charged on a per diem basis. So, per day, so kanina is per hour, a service is being compensated per hour. Dito naman sa per day, per diem, is a service is being compensated per day. This basis is particularly suited to expert witness or other legal type services and to other short-term engagement involving intermittent personal services. Where per diem services are furnished, the civil engineer should be compensated for all the time devoted to providing them, including travel. So, sa per day na method, yung lahat ng services of a civil engineer must be compensated, including yung travel niya. For instance, a client has multiple construction projects which is being held to a civil engineer. So yun, yung civil engineer na yun is travel from construction project A to construction project B to construction project C, or so on and so forth kung marami pang construction projects, almost, and should be compensated for all the time devoted, including standby time. So, kapag ang isang civil engineer is nasa construction site, construction project, kahit wala siyang ginagawa dyan, katayo lang siya o nakapo sa office, that is usually called standby time. So, yan ay binabayaran pa rin. That is also compensated. So the per diem charge should be based on the complexity, risk, and importance of the services and own experience. So, kagaya ng sa per hour billing rate, a civil engineer is compensated per day, which the rate of the charge or the compensation varies, depende pa rin sa complexity o kung gaano demanding yung work, risk, and important.
I am Irish Peace Canilla, and I will be discussing about the fourth and fifth method of charging for civil engineering services. So first is cost plus fixed fee. Cost plus fixed fee basis requires the client and civil engineer define and agree upon the scope of services the civil engineer is to perform. The scope of services, cost of estimate, and fixed fee should be incorporated into the client-engineer agreement. In this type of agreement between a civil engineer and client, the civil engineer is obligated to have an accurate accounting and accurate amount of what he or she spent on materials and labors. So in this type of contract, there is a much flexibility to accommodate both scope and fee changes as the scope of services is not well defined. So another method is fixed price. Fixed price is frequently used for investigations and studies for basic services and design type projects where the scope and complexity of the assignment are clearly and fully defined. Unlike cost plus fixed fee, in fixed price agreement, the service fee of civil engineer is already identified before the start of any project. So in any case of unforeseen circumstances that is not identified prior to the start of the project, requiring additional service from the civil engineer, the client is not already obligated to pay for additional fee for that additional service from the civil engineer. So, if the project goes out of scope, problems come up, or any other changes occur during the project, owner is not obligated to pay for additional price. So that would be all for my report, and thank you.
Hi, I will be reporting about the percentage of construction cost. First, let us define what is construction cost. It is defined as the estimated total cost of constructing the facility to be covered by the proposed detailed design. The construction cost includes the cost of the current market rates of labor, materials, supplies, and equipment used in the construction. Excluded dito ang cost of land and legal and administrative expenses during the project. Percentage of construction is used to determine the compensation of the engineer for services where their principal responsibility is providing a detailed design and construction supervision. Pag ang service na ibinibigay ng engineer ay ang pagbibigay ng detailed design o pagsusupervise during the construction process, maaaring gamitin ang percentage of construction cost upang makompute kung magkano ang i-compensate sa engineer based sa mga service na ibinibigay nila. The percentage of construction cost method is seldom used wrong because of increasing complexity and large variation in tasks for projects. The percentage of construction cost fee curves no longer have a direct correlation to the required engineering fees for specific projects. Nagbabago ang percentage na na-charge sa engineer based kung gaano kalaki ang construction cost. Mas mataas na construction cost, mas bumababa ang percentage ng fee para sa engineer kumpara sa mga project na mayroong mas mababang construction cost, pero meron naman ito mas mataas na percentage ng fee. The percentage fee shall consider the type, complexity, location, and magnitude of the construction cost of the project and shall not exceed the following percentage of estimated construction cost. For feasibility studies, 3%, detailed engineering design, 6%, detailed architectural and engineering design, 8%, construction supervision, 10%. In-emphasize dito sa mga percentage na ito na hindi kailangan i-adapt ito sa lahat at bawat project na iyong hahawakan. Based sa mga maibibigay na service ng isang engineer sa project, ang mga percentage na ito ay pwedeng gamitin basehan kung magkano i-charge ng engineer based sa mga services na ibibigay niya.
Good day everyone! So I am Giselle Fajardo and I'm going to tackle about schedule of minimum basic fees. So under the schedule of minimum basic fees, there are 3 principles to observe. First is that when doing work on foreign assisted projects or in projects where international consultants participate, the civil engineer performing similar or equivalent work should accept compensation that approximates the international standard rates. So by this, sinasabi na ang isang civil engineer na nagtatrabaho sa isang foreign assisted projects or international projects ay dapat tumanggap ng compensation na pasok sa international standard rates. So kapag ang isang company hindi sununod na bigyan ang civil engineer ng compensation, is that pwede silang patungan ng penalty. Second principle is civil engineers regularly employed in the private sector shall have a minimum compensation corresponding to 10% more than the minimum wage prevailing in the region as basic monthly salary. Civil engineers employed in the government sector shall have a minimum basic monthly salary corresponding to appropriate entry positions provided by the Civil Service Commission. So, tinalaga ng PICE na ang civil engineer ay magkaroon ng basic monthly salary na 10% more than sa minimum wage sa isang region. And also, sa civil engineers na employed sa government sector, dapat magkaroon sila ng minimum basic monthly salary na appropriate sa entry position based sa Civil Service Commission. For the third and last principle, a civil engineer employed in the private sector who signs and seals the civil engineering plans, specifications, and other related documents of a certain project for and in behalf of his employers shall be compensated with a minimum of 10% of the professional fee for the project and above the basic monthly salary. So kapag ang civil engineer ay nagkaroon ng major role sa isang project, like siya yung nag-sign or nag-seal ng any document in behalf of his or her employers, dapat bigyan siya ng 10% of the professional fee for the project in addition sa kanyang basic monthly salary. That's all and thank you.
To continue the topic, schedule of minimum basic fees, I will be discussing the rates of compensation for various services of a civil engineer. The first section will be minimum compensation for civil engineer as prime professional. Ang ibig sabihin ng prime professional dito is kapag ikaw ang in-charge sa overall coordination ng isang project or construction ng isang taxpayer or people-funded na public hospital or bridge halimbawa, is entitled ka sa minimum basic fees that I will discuss later on. Group 1, or simple structures such as lofts, warehouses, garage, sheds, market buildings, and comparable projects of 1 but not more than 2 stories. Makakakuha ka ng 6% kung ang project construction cost nito is 10 million pesos and less. Kung included naman sa range na over 10 million to 20 million pesos, ang minimum basic fee sa iyo is 600,000 pesos plus 5.5% excess of 10 million. Which means, kung meron kang 15 million pesos na construction cost, subtract mo siya sa 10 million, so meron ka ng 5 million pesos na excess. Then yung 5 million, you will multiply it sa rate na 5.5%, then add yung 600,000. So you will now have 875,000 pesos as minimum basic fee for a 15 million peso na project. For over 20 million to 30 million, you will have 1.15 million plus 4.5% of excess of 20 million. For over 30 million naman, 1.6 million plus 3.5% of excess of 30 million. So ang pag-compute nito, same lang sa process kanina. For Group 2, which is buildings of 3 stories up to 14 stories, tower tanks, exhibition buildings, memorials, industrial buildings, simple bridges, low dams, piers, wharves, bins, and silos, and comparable projects. So, ang project construction cost kung 10 million and less, you will have 7%. For over 10 million to 20 million, 700,000 plus 6.5% of excess of 10 million. For over 20 million to 30 million, 1.35 million plus 5.5% of excess of 20 million. For over 30 million naman, 1.9 million plus 4.5% of excess of 30 million. For Group 3, which is under pa rin sa compensation ng prime professional, it will include buildings with 15 or more floors, long span and complex bridges, high dams, major port works, power plants, and other complex structures not covered in Groups 1 and 2. Same pa rin naman yung range under project construction cost ay nagdi-differ lang siya under sa minimum basic fees nila for each group. And if hindi ikaw ang prime professional but you are rendering basic civil engineering services sa mga nabanggit na groups, you shall have a minimum of 25% of the prime professional fee. Next is minimum compensation for civil engineer as professional, not prime. Allotted naman ang section na ito para sa mga civil engineers na nagre-render ng kanilang basic engineering design services not as a prime professional or hindi sila ang major engineer na nagmamanage ng isang project. So for A Group 4, or hotels, large apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, store buildings, resorts, hospitals, and comparable projects, you will have 1.05% for 10 million and less na construction cost. For over 10 million to 20 million, you will have 105,000 plus 0.975% of excess of 10 million. For over 20 million to 30 million, you will have 202,500 plus 0.825% of excess of 20 million. For over 30 million naman, you will have 285,000 plus 0.675% of excess of 30 million. And B, structures not falling in any group shall be classified into Group 3 or ang magiging fee niya is doon ibibase. Also under Group 4, the professional and prime civil engineers can get the same minimum fee if they work on the projects listed in this group. The last part would be minimum compensation for civil engineers for rendering the following services. This includes 25% of professional fee plus 25% of saving for value engineering, 2,000 pesos per appearance for expert witness, and for academic services naman, who has a BS degree holder, you will have 75 to 150 pesos per hour. For doctorate degree holder, 150 to 250 per hour. For lecturer, 250 to 450 pesos per hour. For conducting tutorial or refresher courses, 500 per hour. For resource speaker, 500 per hour. For writer or author, 3,000 pesos per article. So these minimum fees or compensations na inalaw ng PICE is nakaset na talaga siya under the manual but pwede pa rin siyang mabago over the years. And notice na minimum lang siya, so entitled ka pa rin na magkaroon ng sweldo above minimum. Depende halimbawa sa employer mo in the future kung nasa capacity ba nilang magbigay above the minimum or not. Or pwede ring i-consider na factor ang place of employment. Meron kasing tinatawag na Manila rate, province rate, or school rate, and it is said na mas mataas kapag Manila rate or kapag sa city ka nagtrabaho compared sa province. Most importantly, nakadepende pa rin ito based on your experience as a civil engineer. Kung marami ka na bang na-handle na successful projects, or kung matagal ka na sa field, or kung na-promote ka or mas mataas na yung seniority mo as civil engineer. Kung academic-based naman, is yun nga ang specialization, which is apparently, kapag doctorate degree holder ka, mas mataas yung sweldo mo because of the higher or longer education na na-acquire mo, compared doon sa mga BS degree holder. But meron ding cases na kahit matagal na ang isang civil engineer sa industry, is mababa pa rin yung sweldo or malapit pa rin siya sa minimum compared sa mga recent civil engineers. So choose kung saan may tamang compensation rate para masuportahan yung needs mo or your family and at the same time na i-improve yung craft mo as a civil engineer. And that concludes our report.